Namaskar. In this episode of Dil Se, we'll talk about what's happening in the global economy and what impact does it have on our national economies around the world. And in particular, of course, our own economy. But before we get into that, I just want to share something with you, which is my personal thought, which is there are three elements that determine the rise of nations. The interaction between politics of power, technology, and economic clout. And these three things are interlinked. If you look at the history of the world, whenever nations with superior technology through political power have conquered the rest of the world and taken over its economic resources and then become an economic superpower. And if you are an economic superpower, you have great political influence. But none of this will work unless you are in technology ahead of the others. You can win wars by using technology, and that's happened in the past, 18th, 19th century. We've seen the invaders win wars here. So in the context of this in the 20th century, 21st century, we've seen that the United States of America became a superpower politically at the end of the Second World War. They determined what's going to happen to the rest of the world. And then, of course, Bretton Woods was signed. Because of gold, the dollar became a reserve currency. And they determined the politics of the world in many ways. They were politically far superior to the rest of the world. Economically, they could exploit because of their political position. And in technology, they were ahead of the others. But over the years, there's been a change of circumstances. With the opening up of China and with the WTO, the opening up of markets, other economies have prospered, in particular, the Chinese economy. The Chinese are now competing with the US as far as economic strength is concerned. In 1960, and I'll be corrected if I'm wrong, 25% of the manufactured goods of the world were manufactured by the Americans. And today, 35% of the manufactured goods of the world are apparently manufactured by the Chinese. So they are ahead in manufacturing. They have got huge reserves. Of course, they are not as strong in terms of the GDP of the United States of America, but they're challenging the United States. The United States, on the other hand, their economy is in the decline. But again, the Chinese are challenging them on technology on various fronts. This is impacting the world, and President Trump, when he came to power, realized that something needs to be done to make America great again. Now, but what he has done is phenomenal. And overnight, he has changed the politics of the world, the economic relations between the United States and the rest of the world. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow because we don't know what President Trump is going to do tomorrow. But as we stand here today, we have a situation where the Americans are imposing reciprocal tariffs, at least the Chinese, to the extent of 150% now. The Chinese are imposing tariffs on American goods to the extent of 125%. I don't know where it's going to lead. But as far as other countries are concerned, President Trump has said, look, we're going to have a period of reprieve where there's going to be 10% tariffs on goods coming to the United States. And within a 90-day period, we'll decide what's going to happen. He also says 75 countries are negotiating with us, and some of them have given us some specific plans to deal with them. So this is the scenario in which we are today, and we have three extraordinary people with us. I mean, people who I'm actually somewhat hesitant to deal with because I'm no economist. But I will try and sort of see how the conversation moves on in the context of what I have said. Shankaracharya, thank you very much for being with me today. BA honors from Oxford, 1967, PhD Harvard, World Bank 71 to 82, Director World Bank report in 1979, And you came back to India in '82, Ministry of Finance, you were advisor. I think the longest serving chief economic advisor, 1993 to 2001.
Couldn't get a job.
You are involved with SEBI regulations as well, and you've published so many books. 12th Finance Commission in 2004. You have published Can India Grow Without Bharat? India and Global Crisis 2009, India After the Global Crisis, and many others. So thank you very much for being here, Shankar. My dear, dear friend, Rakesh, thank you.
Oh, thank you.
My God, I just feel very, very hesitant. Look at electrical engineering, that you got your first degree in that. BA Economics from Yale, doctorate from Princeton, World Bank 76 to 80, Planning Commission advisor. You published in '94 the Rakesh Mohan Infrastructure Report. 2009, you were DG NCAER. 2005 to 2009, you were Deputy Governor, Reserve Bank. So my God, this is, well, you people are the best guys to be around. Thank you, Germany, for being here, because you're going to give us a analysis not only of the economic outfall of all this, but how this is going to impact the world. Germany, distinguished economist, author, former diplomat, multifaceted career, reflects your deep commitment to academic excellence. You did your master's, bachelor's from St. Stephen's Physics, followed by a master's degree from Massachusetts, MIT, then PhD in finance from Tufts. In '76, you joined the Indian Foreign Service, served in the Department of Atomic Energy, Additional Secretary in the Ministry of External Affairs, and prior to that, Joint Secretary Capital Markets and Pension Reforms, and appointed India's ambassador to the European Union, Belgium, Luxembourg in 2008, where you served till 2012, then High Commissioner to the UK, 2012 to 13. And after completing your diplomatic service, you went into academia and policy research, served as RBI Chair Professor of the Indian Council for Research on International Economic Relations, and you conducted research on international economic policies. Noted author, in August 2019, you published The Promise of India, How Prime Minister Nehru to Modi Shaped the Nation, 1947 to 2019. Thank you, all of you, for being here. Let me start with you, Shankar. How do you view the world in the light of what Trump is trumping everybody, it seems?
Well, Kapil, I currently view it very gloomily. But one should emphasize that all the shocks that we've experienced in less than 3 months since he actually took office were all presaged by his campaign promises. I mean, he said many times that tariffs was his favorite word in the English dictionary. He said that when I come, I want to bring manufacturing back to the USA. He said, I'm going to raise tariffs, which he thinks falls on the foreign countries, and finance income tax cuts for the US people. And of course, we know that Germany will inform us better, that his view on allies was rocky at best. Yeah. I mean, even in his first Trump one, he totally alienated other members of NATO, the leading members. And basically at one time, as you know, there was a doubt about his honoring Article 5 about there's an enemy attack on one NATO country. US and others are obliged to respond. Correct me if I'm wrong, Germany. He actually almost challenged that. Luckily, it didn't get removed. So, I mean, he's a disruptor. And he doesn't care what happens as long as his image and his popularity, as he sees it, is expanded, and that he is seen to be doing things that nobody else has done before, whether they're good or bad, posterity will say.
Mm-hmm. But will manufacturing come back to the United States according to you?
I personally don't believe so. Even if he keeps high tariffs on all countries, at present, as you said, we're on a reprieve, except for China. But even if he brings them up to levels that he had before, or similar levels, and don't forget, he's already imposed significant tariffs since he came. on steel and aluminium,
Yes.
on the automobile sector.
Yes.
He's talking about pharmaceuticals. So he's done a whole lot already. The reciprocal tariffs is a thing of April.
Yes.
These were done in March.
Yes, exactly.
And so, but I don't think his understanding of how economies work in the 21st century is at all deep.
I see.
It's true that manufacturing has declined from quite high levels to something like less than 10% in the US today. But against that, the services sector has grown tremendously, and this is in many ways a cutting-edge service sector. It's not.
That's the technology part.
That's the technology part you were mentioning.
Yes.
And as you said, they're leading in many areas. China may be catching up in quite a few, but they are leading. So, I mean, I think his reading of it comes from politically, in a way, his base is what Hillary Clinton once described to her political doom as the deplorables. That is, those who've been left behind by globalization in the United States context, in states which haven't done well, blue-collar jobs which have gone away because of the decline of manufacturing, and so forth. So that's a solid 40% or thereabouts of the electorate, maybe 35, 40, I don't know.
What's the future, Rakesh, of the United States economy in the context of what Trump is doing?
I'm actually even more gloomy than my usually gloomy friend. What he is doing is really totally unprecedented. Many people have been looking at the Smoot-Hawley tariffs of 1929, which were also came about in sort of somewhat similar circumstances, where people felt that the US had to protect itself, put up tariffs, and so on. But what is interesting is that what he has already done, the tariffs are probably somewhat higher than what the Smoot-Hawley tariffs were,
Okay.
which was an average of around 20%. And more than 60%, even then, of imports to the US were not taxed. So there were only about a third or so were taxed, average came to 20%. And the result was, I mean, of course, there were other things that also happened, was a depression. Unemployment shot up within a year, doubled from 6%, from 8% to 16%, and the unemployment was already high at that time. There was a fall in global trade by almost 2/3. So what he's doing now is much worse or much more than that.
Global trade is, I believe, already
Falling, yes.
Already fallen.
But the point is that then it fell by 2/3.
Yes.
So God knows what will happen now. Second, what is also interesting to me as an economist is that about 1,000 economists actually wrote to Herbert Hoover,
Okay.
don't do this. What I find very interesting now, I don't see a similar action by American economists who've been lecturing us on free trade forever.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm quite amazed actually that this hasn't happened.
But he blames the free trade for this.
Yes, so that's also coming. What is very interesting to me is that the whole premise is wrong, that the US has suffered. I was looking at the ratio of the US per capita income relative to some of the main other advanced countries like Japan, France.
It's $80,000 per capita.
So now
as
it's
for the
about
US.
$80,000 per
Yes.
capita. The ratio, so it's now almost 2.5 times that of Japan.
That's true.
In the year 2000, this is when sort of China entered, and WTO, that's what it's sort of blamed that, look, we allowed them to enter WTO, this is what they've done. So it's good to see what was the situation in the year 2000. So in the year 2000, actually the US per capita income was slightly lower than that of Japan. Now it's 2.5 times, 2.4 times what they were. Similarly, if you compare with France, it was about 1.6 times in 2000, now it's 1.9 times. UK, it was 1.3 times, now it's 1.9 times. So the premise is basically wrong. What is correct is, of course, that China has come up tremendously. There's no question of that. But the idea that US has been taken advantage of by other countries just does not stand up to scrutiny. It is true what Shankar was saying, that many manufacturing jobs have been lost. But then, 100 years ago, 150 years ago, so many agricultural jobs were lost.
No, not only that, I think you're right that manufacturing jobs have been lost, but there's been low inflation
Yes, with low
in the
inflation.
United States because of the fact that Chinese
quite
goods
right.
are coming into. Now, if you
Yes,
raise your
absolutely.
tariffs,
Yes, it
you're
is.
going to be
Yes.
having an inflationary effect.
Absolutely. And another thing that Shankar was saying in terms of technology and service sector, that if you take the usual thing everyone talks about, iPhones, okay, all the value added is in the US. It's only a small, that when you pay $1,000 or whatever it is for a cell phone, for an iPhone, less than 10% or so would be in China or now India. Almost all the value added is up there. Second, I was also talking to some garment exporters here and then asking them, look, what is the ratio between the landed price of some piece of clothing, a shirt or woman's dress or whatever, and the retail price in the US? It's about the retail price is about 5 to 1. So if the landed price is say $5, it's sold at $25, $10, $50. Okay. So again there, the value added is there, not in Bangladesh or Vietnam or wherever. So what is interesting to me is that false stories have been spun in terms of the impact of trade on the United States. What is true, however, is that certainly certain pockets, in particularly the Northeast, have been impacted because of the job shifting abroad.
Right.
Now, since I used to live in New Haven first as an undergraduate, more recently as a professor, you take the train from New York, say, to Boston, and on both sides,
I've taken that several times.
yeah, on both sides of the track, you see old garment factories,
That's right.
which have been,
Detroit, for example.
Detroit, same
completely
thing,
destroyed.
Detroit, exactly.
Yes.
So what I'm saying is that this has been going on forever in the world. Even read novels about the UK, that when the looms, etc., came in, they also used, all the clothing was done by hand before that. Right? Lots of jobs were lost. And of course, there was a lot of suffering, there's no doubt about that. One thing that I do wonder actually on this issue is that is to do with women's labor force participation, that which has gone up tremendously in the United States. So say till the late 60s or so, it was still relatively low. One of the, I'll just do the connection with this, that in those days, earlier days, when this kind of disruption took place, only basically the men who worked, and then they had to find another job somewhere else. Now you have to find 2 jobs to move, because almost all women are working. Okay. So I just wonder, because what I do know is that mobility has traditionally, geographical mobility has traditionally been very high in the United States. And I know that till the mid 70s or so, 1 in every 5 households in the US moved every year. Some of them would be just moving from here to the next
Well,
neighborhood.
it depends on tax advantages
Yeah,
in different
and also
states
just
and all.
moving, going up in the world and moving up. Now that has come down tremendously. So what I'm saying is that one of the thing, what is interesting to me is that despite all the economists, everything else, so much research, etc., in the United States, you haven't seen much saying that, look, all the value added is here. Unemployment has been low, so it doesn't mean that Americans are out of jobs. Okay. 2, just look at all the jobs created by the imports, right? And whether it's trading or designing, marketing, and everything else. 3, that there hasn't been that much of an effort to concentrate on these areas where the suffering does exist. Lots of people have lost jobs, there's no question about that. What do you do? How do you help those people? How do you help those places?
Why women have to work in the United States? Because only with one salary you can't make ends meet in the United States. This is what I am given to understand.
It's a question of expectation, no? And how do you expect to live?
Expectations are based on how your parents live.
Yeah,
And a lot of people feel they don't live as well as their parents.
That's right. That's right.
So, but before I get on to that, I'll refer to one person who was their finance minister, but let's talk about the overall situation. My learned friends here have talked about the economics and financial uncertainties. Let's talk about what is certain. Some things have become certain, which is counterintuitive. What has become certain, which was always there in the background, is this US discomfort with the rise of China.
Absolutely.
Both as an economic power and as well as in the future as a strategic rival. Now, even during Biden's time, and even earlier than that, there were murmurs, there were some moves done by Biden. Trump has made it crystal clear, enemy number one, China. So, and obviously the Chinese are reacting to that, but we'll come to that later. His global vision, which I think is shared by a number of, within inverted commas, strategic experts in the US, is that Russia is not that much of an enemy. Russia is not what Soviet Union used to be. Russia is not even a communist in the traditional sense. Europe is neither here nor there. The US spends more on Europe's security via NATO than is warranted given the fact that Europe is relatively affluent. So Europe is, well, they will look after themselves. Russia, we don't need to be that worried about them in terms of what's going on in Ukraine. Enemy number one is China. And let's go back to Monroe Doctrine. So that's why Greenland, that's why Panama Canal. The US is thinking of itself as Northern Hemisphere. This is ours. Right from the top. And that's why this silly stuff about Canada should join us. So there, you see, there is a certain, I'm not saying that it is rational. I'm trying to peer into Trump's mind.
You're finding logic where none exists.
That's the usual habit.
So this is, but if you listen to some of the so-called strategic experts and Vance and so on, the kind of stuff that Vance said while he was in Greenland with his Indian origin wife, I'm sure she must have been not feeling that comfortable if she is well read enough, that he was basically saying that, you know, you guys, that means Denmark, not looking after the Greenlanders and we need to step in. Basically, we need to take over Greenland. So that's the vision that Trump and his followers and acolytes and those who believe in what he thinks, right or wrong, is my understanding. So these things have become certain. They've all come to the surface. I'm referring to the certain versus uncertain. While on the economic side, there are just too many imponderables. So is this good for the US? I think most rational people will say it's not. But on the other hand, I would disagree with this feeling that everything was going well with the US. There's tremendous amount of discontent, whether it's this talk about opioids, whether it's the talk about 1 and 2 marriages breakup. I remember an incident in Los Angeles. Some chap went to the top of a hotel and with a rifle with telescopic sight, he picked off people from somebody listening to music, he doesn't know a single one of them. And then you've all heard about the odd
Las Vegas.
shootings in schools and post offices.
Yeah.
I've not heard about it anywhere in the world. Okay, there is too much availability of guns, but is it only availability of guns? There's something deeply, how should I say, unsettling to many in the US for a variety of reasons. They have family, that is excessive use of more than recreational drugs. So some of this is uncertain and is showing up in Trump saying that family is important. That's why he brings in somebody to say a prayer in his first cabinet meeting and so on. You know, God will save us. Prayers is what is needed. So he's appealing to that Christian right in the US. And I'll stop with one last comment, which is color. People don't want to say it out aloud. I'm sure there are a number of people who are highly educated in the US who are uncomfortable with the US gradually not having a majority of white people. This is not to say that they are racist. They feel we have built this society, we have built this country. They forget about the Red Indians and so on. And
This
now,
is the anti-immigration stuff.
that's right. And this is that we don't want too many people who are too different from us.
Well,
There's one other thing in this, I think, I mean, while we're looking at the darker side, so to speak, misogyny. I mean, there is a backlash, I think. I mean, I was there as a graduate student during not just the anti-Vietnam War, but the women's liberation and civil rights were in full swing.
Right.
And I think what we are seeing today in America, last few years as well, is a backlash to, if you like, the rise of black people, colored people, compared to what it was 50, 60 years ago. And on the misogyny side, I think, all this woke business, all of that is creating a backlash, which has the political base and is part of his popularity and power. Going a bit far, perhaps, but I don't know if you agree.
Yes, I agree. I agree with you. Yes, there is a strong element of this. Yeah, no. The funny thing is that there are a lot of women who have voted for him.
That's true.
So maybe they also somehow feel that the US was great when men worked, women were at home looking after the children. Our families were, should we say, more coherent and more stable. So I think some ladies also obviously share this kind of backward-looking thinking.
And that's despite all his known actions.
That's right.
All through.
But let me just add to this issue, actually, that there is this issue about color and how the white still majority may be feeling that in the elite universities now, Harvard, Princeton, Yale, Berkeley, etc., the entering class no longer has only about 35 to 40% whites in these elite places.
That's right.
Partly because of the rise of Indians and Chinese origin people, but also because of affirmative action. So there are many more Hispanics, many more Afro-Americans, etc. So one can sort of just put your mind into their heads that, that say upper middle class, elite white Americans have great difficulty getting their children into these schools. Also because they are very expensive. I'm talking about the elite places only.
That's right.
So one can sort of understand the kind of resentment that Germany is kind of talking about. And this is just going on consistently. Also, at least I find it very interesting that in many of the channels, when I first went there in 1969 to the US, you never had a black anchor in television channels. Now it's quite common. So let me just get back on this issue of the rise of China, actually. That if you go back in history, see, the last time that the hegemon changed was prior to the First World War. That is, you had the last really huge wave of globalization was the late 19th century. And by then, the US had started coming up, but the US was still hesitant in terms of, there were still a lot of isolationist views in the US. They were reluctant to get in the First World War, they were reluctant to get in the Second World War.
The point that I was trying to make was, take, for example, America trying, spending all the money on defense for Europe, for the defense of Europe, right? And the outcome of that is that Europe is doing the kind of social security programs which it can do with the savings, because they don't have to spend anything on defense. And so therefore, the nature of polities in the Scandinavian countries in Europe are far more, what should I say, not socialistic, but there's no real gap between the rich and the poor. In other words, everybody is fairly well off. Unlike the United States, correct, there's a huge gap. So when you talk about $80,000 per capita, you're not realizing that this is really concentrated, like it is in India, right? We talk about our per capita, but ultimately it's
that's the average.
Yeah, that's the average.
It's not showing.
It's not showing. Therefore, the benefits of trade have not percolated down to the ordinary American.
No, I think there.
No, but I'm just saying this is the contra view. I wanted you to.
Not sufficiently would be what I would say.
From the consumption angle, US, I believe, has benefited hugely, essentially from good quality, cheap imports.
Correct.
And if you didn't have them, you'd have much more inflation.
But housing is expensive. You see, we must understand what the needs of the American family is, which is why I was talking about it. Housing is very expensive in the United States. Everybody wants to, live in an
Upscale neighborhood, yes.
neighborhood, right? Very expensive. Healthcare is very expensive.
Healthcare is very
Higher education is very expensive. So you're right, consumption is cheap. But still the ordinary American, and I've talked to several of them, feel that they are not sharing the wealth of the United States of America. And that's creating some problems.
It's
and that's
the
why
differences
it's the
which
differences.
creates jealousy and envy.
That's the
It
point
is
I
not
was-
in an absolute sense
Correct.
that they are badly
That's the
off.
point I was trying to make.
Absolutely. Compared to the global average, they are very well off.
Yes, correct.
But it's the differences which have increased over time, which is leading to this.
Ironically, he's backed by billionaires
Yes, of course.
and oligarchs.
That's because of tax reasons.
Yeah.
That's for other reason altogether.
The one question that does arise in this sort of breakdown of social fabric, or people feeling unhappy because where they are, then they see what other
Exactly.
people are doing.
Yeah.
How much social media has contributed to that in the last 25 years?
Right.
In terms, you can see much more. Everyone is doing so much better than you are.
Correct.
You can
So I
see their
wonder.
cars, you can see their yachts. you can-
Absolutely. Yes.
So that may be also. Now, one other thing I would bring back to economics, so to speak,
Yeah. So let's get back to it.
that trade barriers have never brought back manufacturing, and they've never plugged trade deficits. What people forget in all this is what we economists call the macro identity, which is that a current account deficit or a trade deficit is equal to the gap between investment and savings in a country.
Correct.
So the problem is different. The problem is not trade. The problem is Americans are not saving enough. The government is saving continuously high budget
Not
deficits.
saving enough because things are expensive, and I
No,
still
no,
hold
no,
on to
no,
that.
no, no.
Your housing
the
and
US
stuff.
government, US government.
U.S. government. Okay.
Because they have done so many tax cuts,
That's
particularly on the rich, which goes back to the point I was making, that because you're not taxing the rich enough, you have major budget deficits. Therefore, there's general total dissaving in the country. And therefore,
Therefore,
you
people
can't.
should have not voted for Trump because
Exactly.
Trump is saying that I'm going to
But
give
then
the rich
he's
another good
he's
deal.
addressing it a different way. He says,
Yeah.
I'll get money in terms of revenue from tariffs, which he will, if you continue the tariffs. But so what I'm saying is that the diagnosis is wrong. One, that the US has suffered. From others, it is not true. Even if it may be the case that there are less well-off Americans who do feel resentful about where they are. But they've not suffered because of other countries.
So what is going to happen to the American economy?
It's going
according to you,
well, it's
in
going
the years to
to
come.
it's going to suffer tremendously if
Okay.
this action continues, because this is, as I said right at the beginning, that the kind of levels of tariffs that are being talked about is totally and utterly unprecedented. And second, something we've not gone to in the global economy, if this tug of war between China and the US, so US 145% on China, China 125%
125 now.
on the US, this will lead to a total global trading breakdown.
Yeah, there can't be trade at those tariff
Yes,
levels.
there's
But
no
if I
way.
may add to what
Please,
he
sir.
said about the change of the hegemon,
Yes.
we've all seen the film called Oppenheimer and how nuclear weapons were first tested in Los Alamos. That is a big game changer. You cannot have the kind of hostilities and warfare between two major powers because of nuclear weapons. You just can't. Mr. Trump is talking about bombing Iran. I hope he doesn't try to do that, because my sense is Iran is almost there as far as nuclear weapons is.
Iran is now willing to talk to the U.S. on this issue.
Yeah,
Come
they
to the
will
table.
continue to talk, but continue to develop.
That, of
But
course.
on the financial sector side, which my two learned friends haven't talked much about, you must have noticed that.
We left that to you.
You remember one chap called James Carville? He was an advisor to Bill Clinton. He says, if I get reincarnated, if I come back, I want to come back as the bond market.
Yes.
Because the bond market,
Bonds are rising.
the yields have
output
risen.
yields have risen.
On the 30-year, it
Prices have
is.
dropped.
Yes.
And this is very strange because at times of stress, investors around the world go and buy US government bonds because they see it as a safe haven. I'm sure they still see the US government bonds in terms of their creditworthiness as AAA and above. What they are concerned about is the kind of economic decisions Trump is making, that it will lead to all kinds of inflation. So they are not prepared to accept treasuries at the current rate. So it is pushed by selling the treasuries, they pushed rates up. But what people are saying, okay, he is blinked, because people are forgetting that every day the US Treasury has to issue treasury bills and treasury bonds because many are maturing every day. Right. So it's not something which will happen in the future, which some analysts seem to think, okay, no, but every day there are billions which are maturing. Yes. So you have to issue fresh debt.
Correct.
Absolutely. So that is what is really spooking.
That's why you probably had a near crash.
That's right.
So, Jim, I want to ask you that 40 or 45 or 50 basis point increase in one day of the yield on the US 10-year Treasury.
No, that's factually incorrect. It's about 12 or 14 basis points, not 40 basis points. That spiked up, came back. Okay. So yeah, but it's still a lot.
It's huge.
If you hold $1 billion worth of 10-year US securities, the yield goes up by that much. You have lost in terms of present value of that bond.
So Jamie, this is the other issue, that given that China holds a significant portion.
I'll give you the exact number. China holds, according to media reports, I don't have any access to privileged information, the total holdings that China has of US government bonds and bills is about 700 billion. And it has another 9 or 10 billion worth of US equity in various companies, etc. So total investments, as per media reports, is about 1.6, 1.7 trillion in US government.
So they'll have to come to a deal, no?
So that's one
they'll
reason.
have to come to a deal.
That's one reason why they are not happy with the drop in prices.
Yes.
So this idea that they can use those holdings to threaten US is counterproductive for them.
Exactly. That's why Trump is saying, no, he's a good friend of mine, she is a good friend of mine, we'll come to a deal.
So David, that's my question, that out of the 700 billion holdings of the Chinese and US treasuries, suppose this withdraw 50. Would that make a huge difference to the market?
It could make some difference, but not a huge difference.
Because they can't withdraw too much because nowhere else to put them.
Well, it depends on what the reaction is by others.
They probably sell 5 billion to begin with to test. You put your toe into the water to see how hot or cold the water is.
We'll see what happens. Let me go on to another topic.
Sure.
As I started this conversation with the proposition that technology, political power, and economic clout are elements that go into the rise of any nation. Now, Trump is talking about taking over Greenland. Trump is talking about taking over Palestine, right? Sending the Palestinians out. He's again and Panama Canal. He's trying to assert his political power.
Correct.
Right? He wants an economic deal within Ukraine, right? He wants some of those rare earth elements there. So he's trying to use his political power to get economic benefit. That's part of his strategy, I think.
You're absolutely correct.
Right? Is that right?
Yeah.
And technology is ahead. So he wants to regain the political power of the United States by aggrandizing, right? And using that to retain US hegemony. How far am I correct in that analysis?
Well, his intentions are exactly what you said. But intentions are intentions. The ability to achieve. For instance, his offer to Canada, become a state of the United States. You've seen the reaction.
That's not going to happen. That's not going to happen.
You saw the reaction.
Yeah.
So he may be able to take over Panama Canal.
Yeah, the biggest beneficiary of that is going to be Mark Carney.
So I think some of his statements one has to take seriously and I think Latin Americans must be watching very carefully. He can't threaten countries like Brazil. They are rather big. But smaller countries like Chile and so on must be not comfortable at all with what, if he says, no, but you're right at the bottom of South America and I need certain routes as far as my ships are concerned, warships and other things, so I need to take over your country. So he may have these illusions and delusions. There will be some votes in the Security Council which he will veto because he's a permanent member, because China will definitely bring in a resolution at the UNSC. My sense is that he will finally get distracted from some of these things because of what we just discussed. As the economy staggers or in some way takes a misstep, which it already took some days back, he is going to get distracted because many of his supporters are extremely high net worth individuals. We don't have to talk only about Musk. So Musk is not happy because his Tesla is going to get hurt. He was thinking of China also as a possible market, although China has build your dreams. You must wonder, what is this? BYD, the full form is build your dreams.
That's right.
Yeah, that's the name of that car, which is as good as a Tesla.
Absolutely.
And they're
supposed to be very good.
Yeah,
and half the price.
I've ridden on them in taxi cabs.
Really?
In France, in Metz.
And half the price.
Every time you call for a cab in some of these cities in France, a BYD shows up.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Let me ask you this. Will AI impact manufacturing in the world?
It's already impacted.
And to what extent will it impact?
That is a $64,000 question. But AI, robotics, and all these technological
And the US
advances-
is ahead in all this, no?
US has been,
Yeah.
China's catching up, but the reason why, in a sense, the decline in manufacturing has occurred in the US over this long period
That's part of the
is
reason.
because of technological change.
Correct.
A lot of studies.
Which is why I
suggest-
asked the question, really will impact on manufacturing
No,
at all?
and which is why raising tariffs
It's not going
is
to help.
not going to bring a lot of manufacturing
Correct.
back.
Exactly.
There's also an enormous contradiction amongst his two objectives. Raise tariffs in order to bring manufacturing back and to give me money, that is him, money, to do income tax cuts.
Correct.
Now, you can't have both.
Yes.
If you raise the money to do that, then if you raise taxes, tariffs to a high level, what happens? Trade declines.
Correct.
So your base declines.
Right.
So you don't get much revenue.
Income will decline in the
In
process.
fact,
What do you have to distribute?
furthermore, because of the much greater interconnection of global value chains, as they say, if you raise tariffs across the board, you're raising the tariff as much on intermediate goods,
Yes.
steel, aluminium, components, which go in and out. And so you're really jacking up inefficiency and prices of everything, actually. And that will bring down incomes, it'll increase inflation, it'll bring down incomes. So in fact, as Shankar is saying, it'll have exactly the opposite effect. You also, you're only impacting your exports
I'm sure the economists
as
in the
much
US
as
should have
imports.
told him this, no?
I'm sure they have.
They did. But hey,
I'm sure they have.
But how is it going to affect politics now? Because if the Europeans are going to have reciprocal tariffs to the extent of, say, 21 billion euros worth of US goods, that's what they're talking about. Now, that's going to change the politics of the world.
Definitely, but before I answer your question, on one thing which Trump is right, it's very difficult to find what he's right on, given, is what
You'll
he
not get a visa to the United States anytime on.
No, that's why I'm going to praise him now. So, he has talked about what he considers are unnecessary wars. Now, if you look at the cost in Afghanistan, it was $1 trillion US. Of course, you can say, oh, 1 trillion US can afford it. But, the war in Iraq, the continuing number of troops in Iraq has been set back 50 years.
That's true.
And if you go there, their bridges and all that still destroyed. So to that extent, I'm not suggesting US should become isolationist, but at least in terms of not invading or taking over countries militarily, if he doesn't do that, although that's
That's what he says.
That's
He says.
inconsistent with what
He
he's
says.
talking about in the northern hemisphere. So, I mean, he's not a person for consistency in any way. But looking forward to Europe and how will it affect the trade between those two sides of
The
the
Europeans
Atlantic?
may go to the Chinese and have a deal with them. I don't know.
Unlikely.
I think the only real hope for the rest of the world outside US is to sort of design a set of policies and institutions in the area of trade which recognize that the reality that they're facing now, and probably, given where he's coming from, one says probably there's huge uncertainty, that US is really going to turn protectionist for a significant time. It won't suddenly correct. Now, if that is the case, and if Europe, large chunks of Asia,
Yes.
are truly committed to something like a WTO regime. where
No,
you
even
have-
bilateral trade agreements.
yeah, but I think bilateral, multilateral, regional, basically open trade, rules-based, and where people stick to the rules. If they can essentially strengthen those elements which exist, it's not that they aren't there, but to protect them, that's their only hope. Real
So,
hope.
you mean something like the COP, this is where the US has withdrawn,
Yeah.
but everyone
That's
else
not
is
going to
continuing.
happen.
Yeah.
I guess that's not going to happen.
Everyone else is continuing.
It's going to happen. The bilateral agreements are going to happen. You see, we don't know what the outcome is going to be, because if you have tariffs, the Vietnam on textiles, I'm giving you an example.
Sure.
Vietnam on textiles with very high tariffs, 46%, and you have relatively lower tariffs as far as textile industry in India is concerned. You have an opportunity actually to get the market in the United States on textiles alone. So it depends on what kind of bilateral arrangements are made with different countries, which impact your economies and their economies.
So in fact, you brought me I was about to ask this question, that one of the sort of rationales for what the Trump administration has done on these tariffs is really as a negotiating tactic,
Yes,
which is therefore then reflected in this 90-day reprieve. That one possibility, if one looking at the positive side, is that he actually succeeds in other countries bringing down the tariffs as they would like them to. In our case, many of us economists have been saying that we shouldn't
We
have
should be
raised
doing
those
this.
tariffs in any case,
Right.
and we need to bring them down. Okay, one doesn't like to do anything like this.
but the Indian industry doesn't want to
Yeah,
compete.
doesn't do that. Yeah, I agree with you.
They didn't back in the early 90s either.
Yes, exactly.
But what I was going to say is that
The Bombay Club.
yes. So whereas one country, any country, I don't like doing something because someone is bearing down on me. But that's still an opportunity for us.
I know.
No, I agree. I agree with this because, I keep referring to this. 105% duty we impose on a second-hand car.
Exactly.
It's ridiculous and in the last 10 or 12 years of this current government, tariffs have been raised. And
Well-
they talk in terms of being more private sector friendly, but in an overall sense. But in actual terms, please correct me if I'm wrong, I think they have raised our duties on imports on a variety of
No, in
things
fact,
and on food.
Modi has been protectionist far before Trump.
But
It's a fact.
actually,
It's a fact.
because of the high tariff, very tariffs on some of the items, I looked at these numbers. So the average applied tariff on what we do import from the US is 14%
Correct.
only. It has risen from 10% 10 years ago to 14. Similarly, the average applied tariff on what US imports from us is 3.5.
But
It
is
was
this-
2.4 in 2014. This is this
Is it weighted by volume of imports?
It's varied by the values imported.
Okay.
Okay. No, but the point here is that because our tariffs are so high, then nothing comes.
Right.
Right.
So there's only what stuff that actually comes.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
okay.
But much more could have
More
come.
could have come. And we hardly import any agricultural goods except for
No, that-
dry fruits and stuff.
That's because we've been blocking
Because
it
we've
for
been
many
blocking
years.
everything.
yeah.
There are
So
also genuine livelihood issues.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Of
I agree.
course,
Not that the kind of subsidies that the Americans give to
Yeah,
their
exactly,
agriculture,
exactly.
is just they don't count it. as part of subsidy at all. But let me go on to now the Indian economy,
Yes.
because it's going to impact the Indian economy big time. Textiles, pharmaceuticals, gems and jewelry,
That's our top
automobile
export to the
components.
US, gems and jewelry.
This is going to affect us deeply and negatively.
The number one export in terms of value in the latest financial year is still clothing, bedding,
Yes, that's what I
etc.
said. And there the margins are very, very narrow.
very thin because there are others.
So you
who are
can't negotiate
competing.
a better price.
Yes, all the Bangladeshis and everybody else is also a competitor. Vietnam, but I don't know.
China is
China-
still by
China
far
is-
the biggest.
Well, no, but you see the
Still-
advantages of China, the tariff is 150% or 125%.
That's
And
good.
Vietnam is 46%. And Bangladesh and others are high. And we are relatively less. We have an opportunity actually.
No, but Kapil, this is as I think Gemini said on Rakesh, negotiating position.
That's correct.
And I think the reality will be, like us, all these countries will negotiate bilaterally so that the so-called reciprocal tariff, which by the way it's calculated in a way which has nothing to do with tariffs,
That's right.
will come down
Yes.
Yes.
in the end.
So that's the
So
only
I think-
positive possibility.
That's a positive possibility. So if they come down, but what in the steel sector, the automobile component sector is going to be tough for us
It's gonna be
again.
And those may last longer because those, I think,
Yeah.
for one thing, they're much lower, so they're not ridiculous.
That's correct. That's correct.
There's another aspect to that actually, steel, aluminium, these commodities,
Yes.
that if the gloomy stuff happens, or the tariffs continue, etc., and the global slowdown, then the prices of these commodities, all of them will go down a lot. This happened after the great financial crisis, what I always call the North Atlantic financial crisis. And a lot of our NPAs that took place in India, in the 2010s, the banking system, at least 1/3 were to do with these metals commodity sectors.
Okay.
So this could be a global thing, and this is particularly in the light of China having huge excess capacity.
Right. That's right. Yes.
So this is another aspect of what might happen to the global economy and to us.
But if we're going to have a bilateral trade agreement with the US, and we are now seeing that, look, we should have some kind of an interim agreement with the US at the moment, till such time as 90 days expire and we get a bilateral agreement. What's likely to happen, and I think that's something that I want your thoughts on, that the US is going to insist that you open up other sectors of the economy.
Yes.
Right? And that's where we'll be in real economic trouble. Because we can't afford to open up agriculture.
Exactly.
We can't afford to open up dairy products. We can't afford to open up meat and other
I think
products.
there we need to distinguish.
So then how do we deal with
No, I
that?
think on our side, we have these blanket no's. No agriculture, no dairy. But actually, I think if we negotiate carefully and distinguish carefully, there are areas we are genuinely competitive with, whether it's New Zealand or Australia or US.
If our farmers don't get the real price for what they produce, how can we be competitive?
Sorry, don't get that?
They don't get the price of their agricultural produce. How are they going to be
I'm not saying
competitive?
you're going to be able to do this in rice and wheat.
Yes. Okay.
But there are a whole lot of other agricultural commodities where we, I think, could be competitive, and where if we allow sort of bits and pieces to
It's going to
propitiate
have
to
an
the US.
enormous political impact on our
So,
country.
but
Well,
you see,
but that,
Will
this is what
Modi
puts us-
allow it? That's
no,
the other question.
our
this is where it
highest,
puts us in a hard place.
Yeah.
Yes,
So
you'll have enormous pressure,
Yes.
but you'll possibly have enormous political backlash.
That's correct.
So what do you do?
That's the
but you
problem.
see, we have the highest tariffs on things that come to the US is on spirits and spirits, beverages, spirits.
Well,
That's over 100%.
Indians are very spirited people. They-
So,
We can
given,
allow them to send us their
given,
bourbon.
given our spiritual nature, we can bring down these tariffs tremendously, especially in bourbon, because no one drinks bourbon. So you may bring that down to zero.
Yeah.
But-
Bring the tariffs down on these
These
motorbikes,
ridiculous
so it's
yes.
okay.
So things like this also, coffee, tea mate.
Yeah.
Why do we have more than 60% tariff on coffee?
Yeah.
In any case, US does not.
You ask the coffee producers in Kerala and they'll tell you. Yeah, you see, you have to see this impacts.
But you see, US doesn't produce any coffee anyway.
I'm not talking about the US, generally I'm talking about.
But you are saying that you'll do this only in terms of an agreement with the US.
अभी तो bilateral हो रहा है ना.
But there is a thing called WTO, MFN and so on.
Bother about the
वो तो सब
WTO?
गया.
No, we have given up on it.
There's no
There's no WTO.
It's very unfortunate.
It's
No, but I think we'll have to make compromises, real compromises, where politics is involved, because, there's always a danger with the kind of leadership you have in the US, that he'll come back and hit you hard in so many other ways.
right.
So it's not going to be easy.
Also
But I
things
think
like-
doing a bilateral deal, which is somehow possible with the US, is one step that we have to do. Secondly, we have to do a reasonably deep FTAs on Europe.
Europe,
which we
yes,
are
yes,
UK.
that of course,
negotiating,
that of
UK.
course.
And most important, I think we have to at least announce that we'll negotiate with one of these mega regional free trade areas in Asia.
ASEAN.
ASEAN is relatively small, but it's not
CSEP.
small. But
mean,
it's not,
not
it's
CSEP,
not,
yeah,
it's not RCEP, the other one,
RCEP.
CPTPP, which is
Yeah, that is even more important.
comprehensive and progressive
Right,
partnership, trans-Pacific partnership, in which UK has joined.
Correct.
So it's really a mixed
The
up.
very
category.
important thing there is China is not part of it.
Not yet,
okay.
not
Not yet,
yet,
but they've applied.
not yet. But we should
We have
put
to
in
buy-
our,
Get in and then prevent them.
we should look to the future for there, because the interesting thing about the Asian regional areas, trade areas, is they, by and large, abide by
Yes, but the rules of the
WTO
game.
rules of the
Yes,
game.
yes.
Not always, so obviously there are exceptions. And so we need to be there, and these are the countries which are going to continue to grow quite well by most projections. They're sizable populations. We have a special problem with China which we have to sort out.
But I've been noticing the Chinese are certainly making very positive statements
Absolutely.
now, because they also realize that they too have to actually start doing deals with others.
Right,
So the temperature has gone down a bit, and they're willing to talk
Even
to us. And
before
I think
Trump.
this is an opportunity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I want to
Before
add
Trump.
to what Shankar is saying actually, and go further in the sense that, as many people have now been writing, make this into a 1991 moment.
Yes, yes.
Okay? That given all this pressure from the US, so instead of sort of being seen to be caving in to American pressure,
Be proactive.
be proactive domestically in terms of really doing a relatively comprehensive trade policy reform or tariff reform, which then connects to other, as Shankar is saying, in terms of the trade agreements. Think of the CPTPP. I would even go further and think of the RCEP. I'm sure that if you wanted to join RCEP, and if they let you, then you could negotiate certain safeguards for things that you're really worried about. Because the reality today is that, if you look at imports into China by country, our rank is number 31. Okay? And the country that is just above us is Ireland, a huge country called Ireland. So my point is that we could really do a kind of very comprehensive thing on this. There must be lots of things that China imports 2 trillion or something like that worth of goods.
Yeah.
So I presume, I have not looked at those data very carefully, but it seems to me that this is a good opportunity, and especially with the softening you're seeing with China, that you really go into details and say, look, this is the stuff these fellows are importing.
That's correct.
Why can't we double, triple our exports? Because they're nothing, actually. And that'll do a lot of good to us.
Yes.
And as Shankar said, I've been saying this for a long time, that we just don't focus on a neighborhood that is Asia. Okay? And if we go further than that, see, between South Asia, China, and ASEAN, there are about 4 billion people.
Right.
Okay? Average income, with a lot of variation, is something like $4,000 or something like that. If even that grows at 3-4% a year, which could be higher, there's a huge market out there, including our own market, of course.
The problem, Rakesh, and I agree with you, and the problem is that our sectors of the economy, and especially the MSME sector, has been completely destroyed. So if really you do some trade deals, unless you reform within,
Oh, no, I agree with that.
You know, unless you reform within, the benefits are not going
Yes,
to
I agree with that.
Absolutely.
No, I agree with this, but let me just finish with
Sure.
that. I agree with this, but we have too long been very starry-eyed about the MSME sector. The MSME sector, the best way they can grow, if some large manufacturing firms grow and they source from MSMEs. Best example is Maruti, which have done a very good deal. MSMEs cannot grow. If you look at the composition of exports from everywhere, including ourselves, they're from large companies. Which I'm not saying MSMEs will die. I'm just that the future of MSMEs is
whatever it
connect
is,
to large
we need
companies.
to reform the
We need to
Indian
reform
economy
Indian
from
economy.
within is what I'm
Absolutely.
saying.
That's what I'm saying.
Unless you are able to do that, the trade benefits are not going to
That's
occur.
what I'm saying. I'm exactly saying the same thing.
You're not
They're sort of tied at the hip.
Right.
You know, they happened together. You know, in 91 or 92.
So
or
that's the
whatever.
91 moment. No, they
Yes,
should do it
that's-
together.
Yes,
Precisely.
absolutely.
But you
See,
have to. Otherwise, you know, our growth rate will come down. We'll have even more unemployment
correct.
or poor employment.
And for that, you need to reform your entire schooling system, your skill
Absolutely.
development, your health
Absolutely.
sector. My God, unless you do that,
You remember I congratulated you on your speech in the Rajya Sabha on talking about schooling and
that's correct.
health.
You know.
You're absolutely right. We have short-term measures, we have medium-term measures, we
Yes.
have long-term measures. So long-term measure obviously is education. But first of all, the political establishment
Yes.
has to basically gird its loins and say, we are going to go and explain to people even as we do some of this.
Before you do that, Germany, they have to talk to the opposition. They have to talk to others in the country, talk to stakeholders in this country, have a consensus, move forward as a nation. You see, you can't do in India what Trump is doing to the United States. It's not going to work.
So we are shifting responsibility to you as a politician.
And also as a member of Rajya Sabha.
No, but you know, really, I'm very pained at the fact that, you know, we are moving in a direction which is inconsistent with the growth story of India.
Quite right.
Right.
We have
Quite
so
right.
much
Quite right.
potential,
Quite right.
and we're
Quite
not
right.
exploiting that potential. So let's end this program by saying, let's all get together, think of the nation, use this as a great opportunity, and have it as another 1991 moment.
Absolutely.
Thank you.